want to run through a bit about your background and how you've gotten into real estate, because you have quite a, I'd say, untraditional for real estate type of background. And I'd love to hear that story and share it with our listeners. And so, just starting off, I guess, can you tell us a bit about where you came from, your background, what it was like growing up for you?
Absolutely. I think I have a fairly unconventional background compared to a lot of people in real estate. I grew up in northern Scarborough. My dad was a plumber. My mom was an accountant. Both are retired. And certainly we did not have the financial means that a lot of people in our industry do. And so it was just growing up, it was told to me that I had to do hard work, and a lot of hard work, and so that's what I did. And the local MPP at the time had this phrase called "hard work works," and that was certainly my parents' motto growing up, and so that's what I did. Certainly had a bit of success in high school and throughout, and I grew up in music and did a lot of performances, over 100 a year in high school.
What kind of music?
So yeah, I was doing Broadway stuff. I was doing a lot of classical stuff. I did some concert touring with some national orchestras and did a performance tour. At the end of high school, began composing some stuff. So it was a big part of my life, and I loved it. But then most people expected me to go into music and to be a professional musician, but I decided to explore something else, and that something else was business. And so that's what I did in undergrad at Queen's, because I also had my first trip to the European continent right before undergrad started. As part of a concert tour, I saw Austria and the Czech Republic, and I saw the history there, and was quite incredible, quite amazed by it. So I did a history degree as well, and so I did the history degree at the same time as the business degree. And because I did a lot of music, I did the ARCT at the Royal Conservatory, so I did all three at the same time. And because I was in Kingston and candidly wasn't a big fan of being in Kingston growing up in Toronto, I wanted to get out of the university as quick as possible, to get out of Kingston as quick as possible. So I said, when I moved to Kingston, I would stay there for 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, I would move out. Mm-hmm. So that motivated me doing all of these programs within 4 years and getting out within 4 years.
Wow, that must have been busy.
Yeah, it was a little bit busy.
I guess there isn't much else to do in Kingston. Not that I actually know.
And I have to say, I really wasn't a fan going there as a kid. As a student. But unbeknownst to me, was it 4 years after graduating, I joined the university's governing board, and so that began 10 years of going back to Kingston every 2 months or so. And so Kingston's actually warmed on me a bit. Okay. Now I sort of view it as a great place to go to, and there's a lot of redeeming qualities. But certainly as a student, yeah, I had my issues, and so definitely wanted to move back to a big city.
Sure. And I guess rewinding a little bit, kind of leading up to going to university. You talked about music. Like, how did you make the jump, or where did you decide to really go into business? Like, what was it about business that you thought would work for you, or like that you wanted that to be your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had the music background, and I'll start there, and it was almost like a process of elimination. So by the time I had to make that choice as to what I wanted to do, there's a few things that happened. One was I had tremendous exposure across music, and so all these different experiences. When I look back on that in high school, I thought I would probably experience all the experiences I would have if I were to make music my life's journey, and I wanted to explore something else. And And so, I loved the music, but I figured I had done a lot of what I would do. Then I sort of thought I really did want to go to actually universities in the States. And the reason why is for undergraduate schools, you don't have to choose a program. You sort of go and do a general AB, or which is a Bachelor of Arts, just reverse acronyms, or an SB, Bachelor of Science. But broadly beyond that, you can just basically do everything. And I love that sort of view. Conversely, I don't like, and still don't like, the Canadian view, where you sort of have to be very specialist and sort of choose what you want to do when you're 18 years old. I just don't think you have the full experience of life at that point to make those decisions. But nevertheless, I had applied to undergraduate schools like Harvard and Princeton and Yale, unbeknownst of what you need to do to get in, which is, I have the marks, but you need far more than that. You need SATs, and at the time SAT 2s. And back to the point of privilege, I didn't grow up in an area with a family or with the resources to really know that you needed to do all these things. So I actually did well on my SAT 1s, but bombed completely the SAT 2s, because I only realized you had to do SAT 2s like a couple months before the last setting. And these weren't done virtually. You had to go and sit at the examination center. So all that to say, I had, I did the interviews and all that wonderful stuff. The SAT 2 scores bombed the applications. And so I was like, okay, I have to go to Canada. So, okay, so what do I do? So it's not music. Science, great, I got good enough marks, but wasn't for me. Medicine and the whole pre-med journey, I don't like blood, so that was not going to work. The law, I thought about that quite a bit, but I was like, I have to choose the law. Whereas business, it was like, hey, there's all these things in business, and I don't know which one I want to do, but at least it gives me the opportunity to explore, right? So I could do marketing or HR or org or finance. And in high school, I was like, okay, they all sound interesting, but I don't really know much about it. So why don't I choose business and allow me still the wideness and flexibility to sort of navigate all these different subjects and figure out what I want to do.
Can you tell us more, Colin, about what it was really like, back when you were younger, growing up, like, what your family life was like, what your parents were really like back then?
Sure. So my parents, they came to Canada in their teenage years, and they came to Canada, to Montreal, as English speakers in the Quiet Revolution that was going on in Quebec. So that was, righting a wrong, I guess, and making French the predominant language. So they came as Anglophones into a very interesting environment, and had to quickly learn how to function in French. They came to Canada with nothing, like literally. So there was no money in the bank account. There was no repertoire of family and friends to go talk to or to house them or to do anything. Like literally fresh new country and nothing. And so they worked extremely hard. My mom went to what became Concordia. It was called something else in the late 60s, early 70s, but she went there. She worked multiple jobs. She did all of that stuff, and she became one of the few Black women to work in finance in Montreal. And so she did work on the stock exchange there for a while, and she got in her an ethic of hard work, and sort of breaking barriers and doing all of that stuff. She then took a step back to have me, and when I was born as basically a special case. And if there was a frequent flyer program for the hospital, I would have been super elite. Like I was there all the time for 6 years. And so that was intense, and a very intense experience that my parents worked through. And so if I sum that up, my parents worked very hard. Number two was I had a lot of issues, and so I was not going to be a failure. right? So they really engineered things. At the flip side, my dad worked and worked and worked. So he worked, you know, weekdays and weekends. He worked holidays, you know, and for years and years. So I got used to the sort of view that, you know, I would see my dad maybe for a couple hours every couple weeks. And when he wasn't working when he wasn't, you know, doing 80, 90, 100 hours a week, then he would be there for the family. But he always had the view of keep the work at work and keep family life at home. Sum that all up, and I had two parents that were extremely hard workers, that, you know, had very high expectations, that had the view that I would not be a failure. They were very happy to engineer my childhood, and, you know, I certainly grew up knowing how hard they had worked, how many issues that they had worked through, and how many health issues I had to, you know, they helped me work through. And that was there, and you know, many things they would say, like, you know, don't expect that when we die you're going to get anything, because there's nothing for you to get. So you're going to have to go out and earn everything that you get in life.
Do you feel like that weighed on you in a negative way, or was it all positive, that it fueled you to know that you wanted to succeed in your career?
I think it's positive. It was positive for me. You know, look back at that. You can look at that and say that's a ton of pressure. That's a ton of engineering and all that stuff. No, but I look back on that and say that was positive. Certainly, there was an orientation and expectation early on as to, you know, how things needed to go, and I think that was a positive thing. And then over time, my mom would say, you know, there was no handbook for parenting, so she was making it up as she went along. But candidly, I actually do think they had a bit of a handbook, and they were very intense ones growing up, and then they sort of eased up as I grew older. And ironically, then I became more intense, and then I began sort of setting expectations and setting goals and sort of, you know, achieving them, and then setting higher goals, and so things actually flipped. So they were extremely intense until I was about 12 or 13. And then I became much more intense than they anticipated in my teenage years. And then my mom, who was pushing me really hard when I was young, you know, began becoming the, why don't you smell the roses a little bit more when I was getting older. So it was a very, very unique dynamic. But no, I don't regret what they did, actually. It doesn't work for everybody, just to be clear. But I really don't regret what they did.
Was it similar in, like, your friend group? Did you feel like other people had those, you know, a similar dynamic at home or with their?
No, not at all. You know, they were very specific. They were like, you're a black person, you're gonna have to work twice as hard, and so everybody else doesn't. So no, my friends definitely did not have that sort of engineering going on at home. They certainly had the more normal, more typical experiences growing up in my elementary school and even in high school. You know, by high school, I certainly, because I was much more involved in music, and because a lot of people I interacted with were, you know, more advanced in music. I interacted with a lot more people outside of my high school, in different high schools across the city and the like. And so it was a different set of people, and perhaps some of those people had a little bit more of the parental engineering going on. But certainly in my elementary school, very, very distinct. My parents were all over, including with teachers and with the principal, and, you know, they were very activist type of parents. But it was clear to me that, no, you're special, you're unique, you're gonna have to work twice as hard.
Okay. And so then when it came time in your teens and getting ready for university, that's where that mindset came from.
Yeah, and it actually didn't even come from that. It came from, I love history, and so there was my grade 9 history class, and then my grade 11 history class, where we learned about like ancient Rome, and we learned about the Roman Senate and the patricians and the plebeians and all of that stuff. And I kind of like took inspiration from a lot of the leading figures, the emperors and before that the senators, and sort of kind of view myself as, hey, what impact on the world am I going to have, and how am I going to create transformational level of impact such that when I'm gone, hundreds of years later, people know who I am. And so, as a high school student, you become crazy and you think about that, and then you become more and more ambitious. So that's basically what happened, and one of the reasons why the tables turned in terms of intensity at home. It was basically a history class in grade 9.
And where did real estate or anything related to real estate ever come on your radar back then?
Yeah, so I was a geek, as you can probably interpret. So I was geeky on 2 things growing up. One was aviation, and the other one was cities. And so, how did I express my geekiness? Well, I expressed my geekiness in terms of building models of cities. So I had models that I would build, first of Lego, and then I'd go out to the craft store and buy foam boards and build miniature cities with the highways and the office towers and the like. And then I would go and print out photos of city skylines, and I'd go on the city, skyscrapercity.net and sort of look at these things. And then when urban Toronto came about, looked at that too. And then I'd go further, and I would be excited by how finally the city skyline in Toronto was going to change, and these things called condos were coming. And so, in 1998, when Concord Addicts sort of took over the rail lands beside Skydome, and I was there. I was there at the first opening of Matrix, right at Front Street, and I can't even remember the cross street. I think it's Blue Jays Way. And I was there. I was there at the presentation center. I got all the booklets, read them all through, tried to get my parents to buy. They didn't. And I remember it was like $98,000 for 1 bedroom. And so I would go and not just go to the sales center. I would go with a camera, and I would take photos of the construction. I tracked the construction and all of that. And I'm pretty sure at my parents' house there's still the albums of photos, and not just of City Place, but of Coulter Properties. That was the Water Club, and 208 Queens Quay would go there too. They used to have a sales center on top of the parking garage. Brought my aunt there and was like, you should buy this at 1 bedroom at $121,000 for parking. And we'd take all the sales materials and would go over it. So yes, I was quite geeky on real estate growing up.
Great, Colin. So can you tell me about Queens, how you ended up there, and why you decided on Queens as a place you wanted to be?
Sure. So in a nutshell, Queens was the place my dad wanted me to go to, and I wanted to go to U of T because it was downtown, big city, and I didn't have to leave. And I actually was a music teacher at the time, and I could continue teaching music to my students by staying in Toronto, and music was a big part of my life. Queens came about originally because I went to the university's fair the year before I graduated, and I saw the Queen's Commerce program, and I saw the high entrance average. I think it was like 94%, and I saw the number of applicants and the number of people in the program. At the time, it was 220 people in the program, and there was all these thousands of applicants. And I was like, wow, that looks like a U.S. style sort of Ivy League program. So that was interesting. And then my parents heard that, and my parents then sort of took that up. But in the interim, I decided I wanted to go to U of T because it was in the big city. And so what ended up happening was I had I think accepted the offer to U of T and had a roommate at Victoria College and that roommate was from an orchestra that I was in. And so that was all well and good. I paid the deposit to stay in residence in downtown Toronto. And that wasn't a small sum, it was like $500. And then we had this family discussion the Sunday before the day these decisions were due in finality. And so this is pre-electronic age, so, you know, the family discussion happened. It was decided after a long debate that I would go to Queens. And so what happened was my dad and I drove the decision up to Kingston for residence, and it's either my aunt or my mom drove the decision to Guelph, which was the university's processing center, to reverse going to U of T and to choose Queens. And then coming back from Kingston that same day, I had to call my roommate at U of T and say, I'm sorry, I'm actually going to Queens. So that's how this whole thing came about. And the night before I had to move to Queens was one of the few times in my life I cried. I cried and cried and cried. I thought my life was ending. It was a terrible thing. And it's also one of the few times in my life where my dad came in and had one of those dad-son conversations. And literally it's probably happened like 3 times in my whole life. And he's like, no, you'll be fine. Basically, the point was you'll be fine. So the next morning, off I went to Kingston and to Queens. That's really how that came about.
Okay. And like in terms of going to university, like was that something that you wanted to do? Like that you thought that would be the right step for your life, your career? Like what about the education system did you feel like was where you wanted to pursue, or was that just the way of life?
Yeah, I honestly did not know really what university was. You know, despite my mom having gone to Concordia, I really didn't have a clue. I had the Bugs Bunny sort of like cartoon impression of a university, which was like, you know, this big place, lots of buildings, and that was it. And then you wear a gown, and like literally that was my impression of it. Certainly I got the impression that people went there and did financially better and ended up with careers that were better, it seemed, and that you could do a lot of things coming out of university. And so to me it was like, well, this feels like the better place to go to. And then I, put in the whole ambition thing as a result of high school, and that went from just going to university to I want to go to the best one in the world and all these things.
Right. And then you went to Queens, and was it what you expected at all, or what was your experience like there?
Yeah, it was not what I expected. It was, I mean, I guess it's easy to say it wasn't what I expected because I really had no real expectations going in. If your impression is it's a Bugs Bunny sort of university type of cartoon. Queens was interesting, right? Because first off, it was in Kingston, I wasn't a fan. 2 was, it was a small town. And then 3 was, it had all of these traditions and ways of doing things. And, the orientation for me was Frosh Week. And right off the bat, these people painted in purple with their, what I thought were tremendously ugly looking jackets, pounding them on the pavement and chanting was like, this is just outrageously stupid. And then it was like, yes, you're supposed to, join in the fun. And so you had 3 days of more university orientation, which seemed normal. And then you had 4 days of faculty specific. And for the faculty specific orientation, you paid $100 and whatever it was bucks, which again was not insignificant for me, to wear this uniform, which seemed stupid, and then do all sorts of things. And so what I saw was just stupidity. And so, within a couple hours, I'm like, I'm done. And I just left. And I just refused to participate in the rest of Frosh Week. And I remember being in the commerce office, the day after I sort of walked off the whole thing, and the head boss, which is like your head second year orientation person, we became actually fairly good friends, and he's actually in real estate now. And I remember him telling me that, don't worry, this is stupid, and next week it'll be all normal. So I remember that. A few other people that were also bosses that were chasing after me, telling me stop quitting, don't do it. We became friends too. But the whole like that first week, I just think was one of my worst weeks, period. And I just thought the whole experience was just stupid. So fortunately, the next few weeks were like, okay, this is a university, it's normal, and I'm not gonna, quit. But then, and then other things began to happen over the course of the year or two. I was very distinctive at Queen's. I would say, and I viewed that more positively, but I'd say in terms of the number of Black people at Queen's, when I started, might have been 20 out of the university's student population of maybe undergrads and grads, 14,000 people, right? Like it was just, like it was incredibly distinctive, and people knew me, just like they knew me. Positively, I got involved in all sorts of things within business and with that, outside, across dual degree, with the history side, and the opera company, all sorts of things, and that was positive. There were controversies at the time, and I didn't even realize some things that I now know are incredibly offensive, like blackface. I got introduced to blackface through a controversy at Queen's, and prior to that, never heard of blackface, didn't know what it was, didn't know why it was offensive, just no clue. And my first exposure to that was at Queen's. So, there's all these things that happened that, made the Queen's experience in many ways very positive. In many ways I sort of recast things as hey, it's, this negative might be viewed as positive, and then, but it was certainly a formative experience.
And so, did those experiences at Queen's, it sounds like generally were positive, like did being one of very few make you see the world in a different way that you hadn't before?
No. It was, I was just naive, right? So, why do I pause? So, on the one hand, my perspective was, this is how the world is, and it's just preparing me for how the world is. And so, pull your socks up and get used to it, was broadly put my perspective. On the flip side, looking back at it and talking with a lot of students, and there's the controversies that have happened over the years, having conversations, you sort of you look back and you realize there's certain activities, certain parties, certain events, certain this and that, trips, etc., that you weren't invited to, you didn't participate in, and candidly, even if you were invited to, the splurging of money would have been just inaccessible for you to participate in. So, there's that entire sort of realm of the experience at Queen's, and that also goes not just for Queen's, but other places like Harvard, where you couldn't participate in all that stuff. And so you only realize that on reflection, because in the moment you didn't know it existed. As I was going through in the moment, I had the view that the world's not changing for you. You got to figure out how to make it work in this world, and so do it, or else you'll be left behind.
Right. And so then, how come you decide to go to Harvard after that experience at Queen's? It seems like, I guess on one hand, you probably know what you're walking into, but also like feeding into this machine where it maybe puts you in a space where you are one of the few, or disadvantaged in some way?
Yeah, Harvard for me was correcting a mistake, and the mistake was not getting in undergrad. So that was like part of the back of my mind, and it was a journey. And all throughout undergrad, it was my goal. It was my goal to correct this mistake. And as great as Queens was, it wasn't the place I wanted to be as my top choice. So that was a big part of it. And part of that was I wanted to be relevant in the world, not just in Canada. And so I viewed Harvard as a relevant institution in the world. And I viewed, I studied up on all the, presidents that had studied at Harvard and all of the Nobel Peace Prize winners. And, to me, just being able to walk along the same bricks that John F. Kennedy did was an inspiring thing to do. And I, in the undergrad app process, and again, this is in the era where they ship you books and you look through them. I remember one image, it was at Princeton, where the class is happening in the professor's office, and it's like 10 people sitting around, in a circle, in this massive office filled with books. And I'm like, wow, like, this is how things, like, very different than what I know my high school to be like. And I was just highly inspired by the ability to sort of participate in, like, this is what class is. So I kept that in my mind. And Harvard for me was actually not Harvard Business School, it was Harvard University that I wanted to attend. And to that end, I applied and got in to the law school and the business school. And then, learned about myself and declined the acceptance to the law school and stayed in the business school. But I say that story because it was not to go to Harvard Business School, it was to go to Harvard University.
And was the experience at Harvard, everything that you would have wanted it to be?
So if my life ended now, I would say no. But what I know of Harvard is that it's a place where what you learned in the business school is applicable later in your career than earlier, most of the time. And B, the network of Harvard, extends for your whole life. What was similar to what I expected was the scale, the magnificence of the place. And that's both an intellectual point, but also just the buildings. The global reputation of the place and the access that comes as a result of it. What was different than I expected was, at the end of the day, Harvard is actually probably at this point now smaller than Queens in terms of size, but in terms of composition, it's young people. And so young people sometimes act in very stupid and juvenile ways. So that stupidity extends to Harvard as well. And so, these cliques and these, parties and these, section things, there's a lot of stupidity there. So in a sense, things were different than what I expected because there's a lot more, stupidity because people were young and they did stupid things. I'd say in a decade or so since I have been a student at Harvard, there's been a collective journey that's happened, including this year. And so the program that one would start in September this year, I guess it's October, but the program that one would start now is very different, I think, than the program that I went through. And part of that is the recognition and realization that change had to be made at Harvard Business School.
And then, after university, I believe you worked between Queens and Harvard. And then after Harvard, how was your experience in the business world in terms of, having these kinds of degrees, having had that experience being one of the few Black people, did that kind of roll over into your career in business?
Yeah, in every environment, I'd be one of the few black people since probably elementary school.
Okay.
So whether that's a musical environment, the high school environment, the boards I sat on, so working at Morgan Stanley, same deal in iBanking, and so it wasn't lost on me that what I needed was premium, globally recognized brand names on the resume to launch a career. And so that was the goal. So in that, Morgan Stanley fit right into there. And it was a globally recognized name, and Morgan Stanley also helped with the positioning to get into Harvard for grad school, right? So, and my goal was get into Harvard as quick as possible. And so the iBanking program there, 2 years, was as quick as possible. So, but yes, I mean, there's a reason why, if you don't have the family, you don't have the pocket, the checkbook, you don't have, a repertoire of industry contacts, then what do you lean on? You lean on a reputation of where you're studied as a checkmark to prove that A, you're smart, and B, you're kind of proven and verified. So Morgan Stanley was key. I think highly of Morgan Stanley, of the people I worked with. There's a lot of stupidity in iBanking too. I would say that there is much less stupidity at Morgan Stanley at the time that I worked there. And I have a lot of respect for the people in all the different offices that I worked with. It was iBanking, so you worked a ton. But a lot of the things I heard go on at other offices and other dealers, I did not see during my time at Morgan Stanley. And so it was a positive experience.
Okay. Was your experience at Harvard different than it was at Queen's in terms of Harvard having like a global attraction of people? Maybe Queen's does too. I don't know. But Harvard's Harvard. Was your experience different there in terms of meeting people from different walks of life?
Yes, it was, but it wasn't as different as you would think. So certainly coming out of, my experience growing up was in Toronto. I might have did one trip. I mentioned the trip I did for performance of concert touring in continental Europe. I went once to London to visit family, and then I went to New York and to Boston, and that was it. That was my international experience, right? And so going to Queen's, one of the people that was in my class, one of my classes, and we had groups, she was from Dubai. And I had never really heard of Dubai. And so it was a complete mind opener to me. And so, Queen's, on one hand, there was an international presence at Queen's, lower than at the time, lower than many other universities of the size of Queen's, but there was still an international presence. I would say the very big difference between Queen's and Harvard on that respect are a couple. One, Harvard is based in the USA, obviously. Queen's is based in Canada. The curriculum at Queen's was very Canadian-centric. And if it wasn't Canadian-centric, certainly certainly in the business school, it was very Canadian-centric, but in the history side, it was Canada / where we came from, which was Britain. So a lot of stuff about Britain, and a lot of stuff about Europe. And so, compared to Harvard, based in the US, and a lot of stuff on the US, but a much higher proportion of the curriculum content on the rest of the world. And I think that's a gap for Canadian universities in general. And I love Canada, just to be clear. But I also think that too much of the curriculum is still geared on Canada, and too little is preparing for people for the rest of the world. The higher proportion of people at Harvard from international countries was very noticeable. And so, and literally people from everywhere in the world, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. And you have these sections in the business school, and you have 90 to 95 people in a section, and maybe 40% are from not the USA. And in every section, you sort of have the flags of countries where people are from. And so in my section, we might have had 30 flags. And so that gives you a sense of the difference. You know, we were in the U.S., so at the time, I learned that the U.S. flag always has to be at the end. It's a specific sort of place, and then all the other country flags follow it. So certainly you have all these international students. You have students that were from the military. You have students that are from all walks of life, and that was, you know, a very rich environment. And I would also say dramatically different than the environment that I had in undergrad, which, though there were international students, it was one thing that you have the vast majority of people being from Canada, with a portion of people being international, versus a very substantial portion of the class being from outside of your home country. And I think where a university should get to is where it's a global university. And at the end of the day, there isn't really call it a home country bias per se. There's a view that the university here is an institution that serves the world and seeks to have an impact on the world. And so teaches from a global perspective.
And do you feel like that's like the Harvard experience that has shaped you to have more of that global mindset then?
Yeah, definitively. There's a course called Business Government and the International Economy, and every case, so Harvard Business School, everything is 7 cases, but every case was a different country's experience. And so one was on Singapore, and I learned a ton about the development of Singapore, how the government's structured, how they pay their cabinet, which is very different than the rest of the world. Another was on Saudi Arabia and female rights, for instance, in Saudi Arabia. Another was on the government in Chile and the historical development of Chile and the different regimes over time, and some of the social dynamics in Chile. I could go on, but that course was incredibly instructive. You know, other courses would talk about you know, companies that, you know, you could have companies based in the US that have a very big global footprint. Others, you know, would talk about things like, you know, The Economist, and how that works. And you can, you know, The Economist might be domiciled in the country, but at the end of the day, it's a truly global publication. And so in talking about organizations like that, you really do shape your mindset and have a different paradigm, especially when people commenting are people that, you know, are, you know, offspring of state governors in China, and are people that, you know, are, you know, royal family members, extended, but royal family members from the UK, and people that, you know, were commanders of part of the US military, and they're all in your class, and they're all commenting on why, you know, why the Chilean government should do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so you definitely get some different lens to look at the world. And then from Harvard, you go to McKinsey, which is kind of like the post-MBA dream of going into consulting.
Yeah, and for me, back to my geekiness on aviation, going to McKinsey was not actually to do consulting. It was to do a risk-averse way of getting exposure to commercial aviation. Because I joined McKinsey to work in the airlines group. And the airlines group was this, it was a global airlines group. And the reason why it was global is you have all these conflicts of interest, and so you can't really serve more than one airline in a particular geography. And so as a result, when you work with one airline in North America, then you have to go to South America, and then Europe, and etc. So you had this small group of consultants that were shuttling around the world, working with all these airlines. And for me, that was a dream. I hadn't seen much of the world. Here was an opportunity to work at the CEO level and with the C-suite of airlines, but you work for a globally renowned and quite prestigious and quite impactful management consulting firm. So, you know, unbeknownst to me, that going into McKinsey and saying I'm going to work only with airlines, is very opposite to the McKinsey model, which is you take people and you have them in a variety of different industries. So I worked through that, and it was rocky at times. But for me, the goal with McKinsey was to do airlines, and that broadened. And so eventually, I worked with aerospace companies, and transportation, railways, and hotel companies, and then with even broader into retail and the like. But that was, McKinsey's a unique firm, very, very unique firm, very impactful firm, very high quality organization. And I worked in Chicago. And so I was, I'll take that back. I wasn't working in Chicago, I was living in Chicago, but I worked pretty much everywhere from Santiago, Chile to Billund, Denmark, to Basel, Switzerland, to Los Angeles. And it was just, it was a tremendously positive experience.
So you had this global experience living in the US, working all over the world, Harvard, McKinsey. How did you get back to Toronto?
Yeah, I spent a year and a half deciding whether to come back to Toronto. And the origin of that decision process was I was traveling around the world. I was in Chicago once every 2 months, even though I was living there, theoretically. And I was like, do I really need to be based in Chicago, or can I come to Toronto? The other piece was my emotional attachment was not to Chicago. And I began realizing that I really didn't care about any of the details of what was going on in any of the cities that I was either working in or living in, but I cared about Toronto. And so I was constantly on Urban Toronto and then Transit Toronto and Blog.to, and following quite religiously what was going on in Toronto, even though I wasn't living in Toronto or working in Toronto. And so, that was the pull factor back to Toronto, which is unique. For most people it's family, but actually my parents were like, why are you coming back here? Because it's a smaller place and smaller environment and smaller corporate sector. And so that's really why it took a year and a half to think about that, because I viewed coming back to Toronto as taking a step back in career and to have things move slower, and because the environment's smaller, the opportunities are less, and the mindset is also different. It's not as entrepreneurial driven, certainly at the time, and there wasn't that ambition that you see in other cities, global alpha cities in the world. There wasn't that scale of ambition in Toronto. So it took a year and a half to decide, but eventually the heart won out, which is, I wanted to live in a place that I actually cared about, that I was passionate about, and also in a country that I cared about and was passionate about as well. And so I would sort of take the, smaller opportunity set, the higher cost for, different things, the fact that Amazon.ca was and still is worse than Amazon.com, and sort of deal with it and chart a unique path in Canada.
And so we come to Greystone eventually, where, in terms of, these brand names that you're putting on your resume, how come you chose Greystone? And tell us a bit about your trajectory there.
Yeah, so yes, the implication was that there was a bit of a change, and there was. And what happened was, around the same time I was deciding whether to move back to Toronto, I got involved with the John Tory mayoral campaign. And one of the things we haven't touched on is politics, but I spent a lot of time as well in political work, both in Canada and the US. And so I was sort of asked to sort of help John Tory get elected, and so join that effort when it was a bunch of people sitting around a table in January 2014. And by October 2014, to my surprise, he was mayor. And so there was a conversation about working for the mayor, and I was honored by their request, but I decided not to. And through that conversation came, this organization called Greystone. And to your point about brand names, when I looked up Greystone, I looked at the website. I had never heard of Greystone. The website looked like it was created in 1992, and I was like, what is this? And then began a whole sequence of conversations that lasted a year. And the original sort of, hey, please join us to do X, turned into a much broader, mandate to lead strategy and growth, and work with the CEO and the C-suite to catalyze Greystone into a much bigger organization. Unbeknownst to me at the time was Greystone's significant success in real estate and the portfolio of held across the country. I had no clue when I joined Greystone. I just knew it as an organization that could be like a CPP. And the reason why CPP and the analogy was important because when I joined Morgan Stanley, I also had an offer to join CPP. And Mark Wiseman, who at the time was leading private investments, I believe, had called me and told me a story about how CPP was going to grow. It's going to become this massive organization with offices around the world and was going to do great things. And so I really thought about that and decided to join Morgan Stanley because it was a bigger and well-known brand name and platform. But I always thought about CPP. And so I joined Greystone thinking, here is the opportunity. I missed the CPP opportunity, so I could do it with Greystone. And so that's why I joined. But yes, it was it took a year. And my initial impression of the website and everything was, very different.
And how was it stepping into this role? It sounds like it was kind of catered to you. I'd imagine, working with the senior leadership team, probably older executives, and here you come with your Harvard and your McKinsey and seeing the world. How did that jive? Like, did everyone get along? Was that a smooth transition?
Well, I'll put in one other dynamic, which Greystone was headquartered in Regina. So in the process of doing this role of lead of strategy and growth, I think I went to Regina at least 50 times, maybe 70 times, right? And prior to joining Greystone, I'd never been to Regina. And my only time in Saskatchewan was taking a train across the country and it passed through Saskatchewan. So that was it. So that was an environment, and it's interesting because the country's huge. People in Saskatchewan are, I think, salt of the earth type of people, very straightforward. At least from my perception, not a chip on the shoulder, not big on being, proud and everything, but very hard workers. So, broadly put, I kind of saw that and said, yeah, I can actually see some similarity, at least in terms of what I'd like to accomplish. And funny to me that they're also big basketball fans, quite a number. And so quite a lot of people at Greystone had this intense basketball tournament, including the CEO, who would get injured playing in these very intense basketball tournaments. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. But to your point, it shook some things up. Here's an outsider with this background coming in to lead this thing called strategy and growth. And if you ask 10 people what strategy means, you're going to get 10 different answers. So here's this guy leading strategy and growth. Yeah, certain people, came directly at me and was like, what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to become the CEO or something? So I literally had those conversations. And I had other people that were like, yeah, this is fantastic. You should really do X, Y, and Z. So I had the full spectrum of responses. Some people that were like, what are you doing? And came right at me. And other people that were, I've been trying to do X, Y, and Z for a long time, and we have this tremendous opportunity, and finally there's somebody here that can really try to push this along, and everything in between.
So how did you transition over to real estate?
Yeah, that was one of the hardest transitions I've done in my life. And that's just something, because I've done so many different industries and sectors and things like that, but that is very tough. For a few reasons. Number one, investment management is a very insular world. Number two, real estate is an incredibly insular world. Number 3 is coming from a background that isn't in real estate, being a person that isn't what people expect when they see real estate, and then making that transition at a level that was not the most junior person is tremendously difficult. And so I spent a year, maybe a year and a half on that transition. It really came about because I did everything that I was on my list of to-dos as strategy and growth, as the head of strategy. And so my point was, having completed the job and being a cost center for Greystone, and I had the impression that I wasn't being fully utilized, it's time for me to depart. So, put differently, I was kind of asking to be fired. And to Greystone's credit, they're like, hey, there's some talent here, so instead of firing you, why don't we see what else you can do? And there was a philosophy point, which is, do I want to be on the management side of an investment management firm, or do I want to be on the investment side of an investment management firm? And it's almost like asking, do you want to be in the front office of the Maple Leafs or the Raptors, or do you want to be on the ice or be on the court? And I thought, hey, I kind of seen the front office pivot, but last time I checked, being on the court sounds a lot more fun. So, why not do that? Now, that wasn't the full mental exercise. In Morgan Stanley, I had worked with Mesrev, which is real estate funds, and I had worked with the infrastructure funds as well. I had worked with a lot of sponsors, financial sponsors, which are private equity firms and pension plans and asset owners. So I had the sense, even coming out of Morgan Stanley, that working as a real estate investor would be something that would be interesting to do. And so, having that experience, having the sort of, hey, I'd love to be, somebody playing on the court, then came, okay, so what do we do? And, my philosophy was that, I work very hard. I'm not exactly going to go all the way back down to, to the analyst level. And that's where the negotiation really happened. And the solution was, I give a lot of credit to my boss, who's still my boss, Ted Walter, who saw a lot of the global experience that I had, working and living all over the world, with the interest I had in real estate and the ability to sort of build a business, with all the operational complexity in the background, hire people, deal with all the regulators, figure out how to construct a strategy, and then I'm all around sort of getting stuff done. He saw all of that as a package, and that package outweighed the sort of lack of growing up as a property manager or as a real estate asset manager, the lack of sort of breathing real estate deals all day, and basically said, look, we can teach you this stuff, but what you bring is an experience of having lived, worked, and done things around the world. And you also bring the experience of being able to get into many industries and you get stuff done. So I'll take that and I'll teach you all this other stuff. And so having said that, now create global real estate for us and create the strategy and build it from scratch, which was an exciting thing to do. And compared to being fired, I was like, this is something that would be cool to do. So that's what I did.
And that's pretty great, both that you showed them that you could handle a role like that, but also for them to kind of, I don't know if take a chance is maybe a little bit too big of a word, but especially in real estate, it's like if you aren't that live and breathe real estate, some of those other transferable skills sometimes fall to the wayside in our industry, and they were able to see past that. Yes. And say you can learn it.
Yeah, and it's to our detriment as an industry, and it's to our detriment as a country, because it's a very Canadian thing not to be able to see transferable skills, right? Like we really want people that have your CFA, your Canadian Securities course, and 10 years of experience doing exactly the same thing that you want to hire somebody to do. extremely Canadian. It is, and by definition, it is not how the rest of the world operates. And in the real estate space, double that, right? And so yes, it is to Ted's credit and to Greystone's credit that they could see beyond that, and could see transferable skill sets. And the sad thing is, like, at the end of the day, progress will happen in this world, right? And it will, like, that's a law. It's like the law of gravity. And so the people that will lead that progress can either be people in the industry, or as Clay Christensen would say at Harvard Business School, or they could be people outside of the industry that will simply disrupt the people in the industry. But nevertheless, change will happen and progress will happen. And we see that in real estate as well. I mean, COVID-19 is a good example of how change will happen and stuff will happen. And so, it's always, I don't understand how people have tremendous difficulty seeing transferable skill sets. Like, it is, and the people that are able to see it, to their credit, will, in my opinion, see outsized returns and investment returns for being able to do that. But yes, to your point, Greystone took that view. I don't think it was a risk, but relative to everybody else and how things work and how things happen in this industry, you can make a good argument that they took a tremendous bet on a background and a profile that's dramatically different than what you typically see.
And now that you've had these experiences, you've seen the real estate industry, you've been in the business world for a while. Like, what do you see in terms of you mentioned innovation and real estate, and I guess what have you learned through your whole career that have really shaped your view as a leader and you being able to be a leader in our industry?
Yeah, a few things. So on the hard work works. Super important to understand, where you were dealing with, right? So for me, that's, really taking the time to fundamentally understand how real estate works, how valuation works, and all of that, and not being proud. My dad would always say pride comes before fall. So in this instance, not assuming or deciding or stating things that I really don't know anything about, right? And so, instead of saying things I don't know anything about, don't say anything and go learn, right? So that's been one guiding philosophy. Second has been, as you hear different things, and as I've heard different things about, it always happens this way, and of course this is naturally, or it's never happened any other way. I challenge that and just think about it, and I just think about it from the basic principle of logic, but I also sort of test and ask, why exactly has it always been this way? And what's the assumption as to why it will be always this way going forward? And then the third thing I've seen is instances where I've underestimated tremendously, whether it's people or the ideas that they've had, and conversely, I've overestimated tremendously people or the ideas that they've had. And so from that, I've kind of learned to sort of really look at everything that is innovative and new and assess. So for a few examples, in my class from Harvard are the co-founder of Grab. Grab is the Uber of Southeast Asia. It is worth somewhere between 8 and 10 billion at least USD. There is, in the year above me, he's from Toronto. We were good friends from undergrad. And I remember he was an investment banker at Scotia. Terrible time there. Now he's the president of Instacart. So I could go on and on. Coffee Meets Bagel, also from my class. Bumble's from my class. there's a lot of people that have done great things, and it's not necessarily evident or apparent at first blush that they will be the people that accomplish great things. And so as I see different ideas and initiatives come in the real estate space, and I would say we're going to have a real tech revolution just like we're having a fintech revolution, and in life sciences there's been a life sciences revolution, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of great ideas and a lot of things. Hard to sort through all of that, but the answer is not no. The answer is some are actually going to work. And so it is imperative as owners of real assets to understand how the society is going to change and how the fourth industrial revolution, i.e. technology, is going to infuse real estate, and not just the buildings, but also how we decide where we're acquiring, how we're actually doing these things. Because less will be done based off of hunch, and more will be done based off of fact. And the facts will become much more apparent with the additional data that we have.
And now working in a TD bank and bigger corporate, how has that transition gone in terms of both your ability to be creative in the firm, as well as our current social climate around diversity and inclusion and Black Lives Matter, your personal experience working in big corporate as what I would imagine is one of the few Black people in your leadership team.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly 2020 has been a big year for that. So first question on the transition. I think it's hard to get a bigger transition, right? You've got Greystone as 180 people, Regina-based, 4 offices, being acquired by a 90,000 employee bank, right? So, night and day. What is positive in that is the similarities of the people, right? So when I talk with a Greystone person, I talk with a TD person or TD asset management person or any other part of the bank, I haven't actually seen a dramatic difference in people. And that's actually really rare. And so that's a very positive thing. The challenge is the bank is full of process and it's full of ways of doing things, and it is, call it a very well-oiled but well-defined machine. And so if you're trying to get the machine, like I do, to do things differently in different parts of the world, buying up real estate, it is a journey to get a lot of people comfortable, knowledgeable, and then excited about doing that. Now, fortunately, I've gone through a lot of that journey. The benefits coming out of that journey is a tremendous platform. And so whether it's TD Asset Management, and depending on how you count, which day of the week or time of year, it's somewhere between 350 and 400 billion. Creates a big platform. And then TD Bank as a $1.5 trillion entity, creates a lot of opportunities for a lot more conversations, a lot more capital raising, a lot more ownership opportunities and global opportunities that were just not within the realm of possibility in the Greystone world. And so it is so far and can be even more a tremendous catalyst to what we're trying to do. From a Black Lives Matter perspective, TD has been a supporter of the Black community for many years. And in full candor, I've heard conversations in TD about Black representation at TD that I've never heard. And this is pre-2020, this is 2018. People were saying things that I was like floored to hear this. Positively, in a corporate environment. But we're at a completely different level right now. And I've been asked to lead the TD Asset Management Black experience. And with the comments I made being made, there is work to do. And there is work to do around representation, where Black employees are. And I don't think that this is unique to TD Asset Management. I think there's work to do across all of corporate Canada, and especially in the real estate space. I think the real estate space is incredibly bad at diversity. Just period, full stop. Like diversity of any type, the real estate space is behind. And in my opinion, might be one of the worst industries for diversity. And then assuming you even have diversity, it's a question about where employees are. Are they in front-facing, client-facing, business development, portfolio management, investment, acquisitions team, or are they in operations? Are they administrative assistants? Like, where are they? And I don't think people have really looked at that, but I think we have an idea as to what the answer is going to look like. And I think the net result of that answer is the answer is unacceptable. And that goes for levels of seniority too. I mean, I think diverse people, Black people, tend to be represented at junior levels. And I think that was an acceptable answer 35 years ago. But nothing's really changed in 35 years. And so how is it that to take Toronto, we're in one of the most diverse and cosmopolitan cities of the world, and you look at Bay Street and it's anything but that, particularly at the senior levels. And so, yeah, it's time for a change, and it's time for progress to be made, and I've been happy to try to put together an effort to do that within TD. But I'd also say within the Black Opportunity Fund, which is another sort of work that I've been involved with, the engagement that we've had across corporate Canada, and then the engagement within TD has been of a level and with so many people that I think that this time there might be actually a desire to make a significant and transformative positive change. Important to note, this is not a Black thing per se. This is a good thing for the country. It is like getting people more economically contributing to the country. When you reduce discrimination, when you reduce terrible economic outcomes, you actually grow GDP far faster. You reduce societal tensions. It's a good thing for the country.
On that point, I guess, like in terms of your personal experience, being Black in the real estate industry, do you feel like that's been a hindrance to you personally, or do you just, obviously we see that there aren't, a lot of other Black folks, but have you felt any personal, instances from that?
Yeah, I try to take a positive perspective, as you could probably see from my Queen's experience describing, being one of 20, maybe 30 Black people on the campus as an opportunity to be recognized, and more people knowing who I am. So it's a similar environment in real estate. I'd say the answer to your question is I don't know. I think on the one hand, more people know who I am because I'm Black. On the other hand, I've certainly had things said to me, including a broker in London who's a good friend, I would say, nevertheless, who was telling me that he was talking with somebody else, and the way that he introduced the fact that other person would be talking to me was, he's not who you expect. So, and that sort of stuck in my mind, because it's like, well, who do you expect? And clearly there's an answer to that. I also, when we go to conferences, and I spend a lot of time at conferences around the world, I'll bring members of my team. We're a very diverse team. There's white males on my team, there's Black females on my team, there's Sri Lankan individuals on my team. It's a very diverse team. And we go to conferences around the world, and it strikes me that we significantly enhance the diversity of that conference by just showing up. So I think that's a positive thing that I'm able to do that. It's a challenge because the environment is what it is. And including in 2020, before COVID, when we were still traveling, certainly I've had people on my team have received comments that were just wholly inappropriate, both from a gender perspective and a race perspective. And so yes, it's 2020 and that stuff still happens. And so I wish it wasn't. I wish I could be naive as I was earlier and thought that this stuff didn't happen, but it actually does, and it happens in real estate. And so I think that's a problem. So what's the impact on me? I'd like to say the impact is neutral, but I honestly won't know for 10 years from now. When you look back at these things and you actually have a fuller picture of what's going on, as I learned today looking back at my undergrad experience.
Yeah. And when you think of yourself as like Colin, the kid from Scarborough, trying to build your career, do you still feel like, do you still carry that today when you walk into a boardroom, you see, you're kind of still one of the few? How does that impact your ability to, feel like included and feel at the table?
Yeah. So it still does, but in probably different ways than what you expect. So on the one hand, I'm not fazed by any environment I walk in. So I've had the privilege of walking into the White House. So when you do that, hard for things really to faze you, and different experiences. So, but it does faze a lot of people walking into a big corporate boardroom or whatever it is. So that's one side. The other side is, as a friend told me in undergrad, at the end of the day, everybody has to take a dump. So as wonderful and prestigious and high level and whatever the titles are, they have to take a dump. So that helps put everything in context as to who everybody is. But the flip side is, I definitely do, and what McKinsey actually teaches you to do is to up your emotional intelligence. And so you're able to read a room far better coming out of a McKinsey experience than you did going in. And so I definitely know when people are looking at my watch and trying to figure out what the brand is, right? Like that happens a lot of times in real estate meetings.